I am so excited to talk to Dr. Mitch Abblett about mindfulness today. Let me briefly introduce him before I bring him on. Dr. Mitch Abblett is a clinical psychologist, author, consultant, and national and international speaker. Dr. Ablett's latest book is for parents, educators, and helping professionals, and it's called Prizeworthy: How to Meaningfully Connect, Build Character, and Unlock the Potential of Every Child. He has published 8 books on mindfulness applications for children, teens, parents, and professionals. He speaks and consults regarding how mindfulness practice can help disrupt unskillful habits and foster compassionate dialogue. Thank you so much for being here and joining me. I'm so excited to talk to you. So, today we're going to be talking about mindfulness, and you have written several books on this topic. I just did a brief intro on you. Can you
Yeah.
just tell me a little bit about what got you interested in this field and what led you down this path?
I've discovered that it's a fairly common path into mindfulness in the sense of stubbing my toes and having a lot of suffering personally, professionally, that kind of led me into mindfulness versus what seems more rare, which is somebody that grew up in it and was infused with it. Maybe their parents were meditators, or they grew up in a religious community where meditation, mindfulness practice was kind of the norm. That I know people that way, but I think mine's a more common entryway. I Many years ago when I was in graduate school, I was first hearing about mindfulness. It was before a lot of the research had taken off, and somebody let me know about a book by John Kabat-Zinn, and I looked at the title of it, "Wherever You Go, There You Are," and I'm like, "What is this?" It made no sense to me. It sounded like Buddhist, religious, or New Age kind of hooey, and so I was very dismissive of mindfulness for quite a while. And yet something about it was intriguing, less around the word mindfulness, but in my early training, I was drawn to study things and did my master's and dissertation on what's called therapeutic alliance between the therapist and patient, the relationship. And I was, as a therapist, really interested in what's called process intervention, like the here and now of how we're communicating. So even though I wasn't a meditator for a long time, I was kind of magnetically drawn to things that are very consistent with mindfulness. And once I was out of school and working, I was also drawn to working with really acute, intense clinical populations. Late in grad school, I worked at a boys' prison in Florida. Came up here, was at the VA as a pre-doc intern, working with combat vets around trauma. And then I worked in residential treatment programs with kids. And then for a long time, I was the clinical director of a private therapeutic school for kids with emotional behavioral struggles. So I started to struggle with my own kind of early career burnout. The technical term for it is secondary trauma or vicarious trauma. And so I was taking on too much of what I was hearing about, and it was really having a negative emotional impact. So finally, I turned around and started wondering about mindfulness related stuff, and started learning about what's called acceptance and commitment therapy, which is a mindfulness based research supported therapy. And I started using it with patients of mine in my then kind of part-time private practice. And then I started bringing it to people I was working with at that school where I was a leader and supervisor. And yet I found that I couldn't really teach this stuff unless I did it myself. Unlike a lot of the other methods I had been taught in graduate school, interventions or therapeutic techniques, this is one where I was like, it doesn't feel like it's possible to use it or do it to others. You have to kind of be mindfulness. So you have to practice yourself. So that's when I became a regular meditator and reading everything I could get my hands on, and then ultimately starting to lecture and publish around it myself.
So there's a lot of talk about mindfulness, and I know you and I probably came across all of this around the same time, because when I first heard of it, all of it seemed foreign and weird as well. But a lot of people are hesitant, and a lot of religions are hesitant with the idea of mindfulness or meditation. Can you break that down? And is there a religious connotation to it at all? I mean, I don't think it's there anymore, but what do you know about it? And then can you break down exactly what mindfulness is? It always meditation, or are there different ways that we can be mindful?
Yeah. It certainly is, for thousands of years, has been linked. Meditation has been linked to certain religious traditions, Buddhism, Hinduism, Taoism. There are a number of faith traditions where it's embedded, and I think that has been hard for the Western mind to get with. Particularly when it has those trappings attached to it. And this is where people like Jon Kabat-Zinn have been so transformative around meditation, is that it can be practiced in a very secular way, having nothing to do with faith or belief. It's actually not about believing anything. It's really about you as a scientist of sorts looking very closely at your own direct experience instead of believing what other people tell you. So in that sense, you can view it as mind training, training your attention, building your focus, building your ability to concentrate, your ability to abide emotional discomfort, pain, with less kind of push-pull grabbiness or pushiness. It is something that doesn't have to be about religion at all. And that's the way I teach it. It's the way I write about it. I'm a psychologist. I'm not coming at it from a religious standpoint. And, by the way, there, as I'm sure there are, scores and scores of, rigorous research studies documenting not only the benefits that can come from consistent mindfulness practice, but also changes in the brain. It's not a panacea. It doesn't cure everything, and yet it's free, in terms of, one's access to practicing it. And it has notable benefits. It does change structures in the brain that are related to pain experience, or related to attention, or related to regulating emotion. So yeah, and you asked about the distinction between mindfulness and meditation. I was in the beginning of my understanding of all of this, I got those confused, those words, mindfulness and meditation. I mixed them up. There is since I guess I'm in the professional world around mindfulness, there is a distinction that I found helpful. Meditation is a form. It's a structure. It's like a support. It's a way of practicing. Kind of like in a lot of endeavors in life, there are, like when you exercise, you can run, you can lift weights, you can do martial arts. I'm a martial artist. There are lots of forms and structures for bringing energy and growing energy in the body, building strength, flexibility. And meditation is a series of forms and structures or containers that are designed to help facilitate greater flexibility of mind, greater tolerance of pain, of discomfort, more focus, more flexibility. So mindfulness is the state that occurs not always when you may be meditating and not be mindful. You may be showing up to a practice and not really be engaging what would be called mindfulness, which, the classic definition, I've referenced him a couple of times already, Jon Kabat-Zinn, paying attention on purpose to this present moment in your experience without judgment. I like to shift that last part, instead of without judgment, kind of with a sense of kindness to your own experience of the moment. So it is a state that occurs often when one is engaged in meditation. So that it's kind of the the goal, even though there's a danger in focusing on goals with mindfulness practice, but the goal is to cultivate the muscle of dropping into that state of mindfulness.
I like what you said about brain training as opposed to meditating. I think people can relate to that more, because the more we flex that muscle, the more we work that muscle, the more we pay attention to being in this moment, it really does help us be more present moving forward, right? Because it's a practice.
Absolutely. It was a bit of a eye opener for me when I first I'd heard it before, but to really experience it, which is the mindfulness that all we have are moments. Time is a construct. As I've like to say to people, it's a little bit of a Zen kind of koan. When is your mind? It's the mind is sometimes focused on past or future, and yet when is the mind? Always now. And so to really experience that, which is what I think mindfulness practice gives you, is pretty eye-opening. That it's never been the case that I've awakened on a particular day and I have something other than moments, or that I have a time machine that can go 5 nanoseconds into the past or 5 nanoseconds into the future. Be great. I'd buy some lotto tickets immediately, but that's not the way it's ever worked. And so the cool thing about all of this is that it's very internally consistent. It always, the things that you encounter when you practice this, they always apply. And that there's a sense of reassurance in that we only have moments, therefore we better get busy living and letting go of fixation on stuff from the past or fixation on what might be in the future, and just wake up and do our lives now.
Well, they say if we're living in the past, we're more depressed. And if we're focusing on the future, we tend to be more anxious. And the moment is where it's at. There's a show on Netflix. I forget what it's called. It's some brain thing. But they showed this person, they're like, okay, focus on this man jumping on the trampoline. So you're watching the person, how many times did he jump? And then they come back and they're like, did you notice the gorilla in the background? And the majority of the people are so focused on the man on the trampoline that they completely miss everything else that's going on. And that's what's happening in the world, right? I mean, we're walking around thinking we're seeing everything, but we're really not. And that's what you mean by getting more moments, paying attention to being more in this moment so that you're not stuck in the past or focused on the future. And that way you can really take on more, right? You can watch that sunset. You can be more grateful for this moment. Focus on your breath.
Yeah, no, I just turned 50 a little over a week ago.
Happy birthday.
My wife, thank you. My wife surprised me with a little trip to Fort Lauderdale to get away, and the in-laws were here with our kiddos. And the morning that we left to come back up here, I had a few minutes out on the balcony overlooking the ocean at sunrise, which I don't think I had seen a sunrise over the ocean in years. This is part of what happens when you have young kids. I mean, they get you up early, but you're not out appreciating the sunrise. You're like running around dealing with stuff. And I paused, and I did take out my camera, but after I was present for a bit, I would say mindful. And I intentionally took a few pictures of the sun poking up over the Atlantic, but then I switched my phone to panoramic so that I could get that panoramic view. And that's the metaphor I have in my mind about what happens with, and you don't have to become a monk or anything. Like, you can go on retreats and practice intensively, but just some daily practice over a period of weeks or months. And your perspective in these moments goes from what I consider to be like tunnel vision, where you're fixating on your thoughts, you're fixating on the emotion that's coming up, you believe you're absolutely right about the other person being wrong or whatever. all the polarization and bias and, disconnection that we're seeing in the world. With practice, you start to, with the mindfulness practice, your perspective, it's not always this way, but it's more likely to be that panoramic perspective. You're not any smarter in an IQ way, and yet you're taking in more, and you're not grabbing on little pieces and then missing the rest.
Well, it's like when we're stuck in our minds with anxiety or stuck on an irrational thought or belief. We are looking at everything through a tunnel vision. But then once we relax and we expand that vision, we see, oh, it wasn't as bad as I thought it was. I was just so hyper focused on that negative that you expand and you see more. It's going from black and white to shades of gray. With mindfulness, what you're telling me is that your vision expands as well from that tiny little thing that you're focused on, whatever, all the to-do list that I have to do or stuff that I'm stuck on, like from what happened yesterday, to, okay, focus on this moment and appreciate what's in front of you, or appreciate how you're feeling right now.
Or, in addition to appreciating or gratitude or just kind of being, which is part of what comes from practice. Again, not always, but it's more likely it's like you've trained your brain to notice when it's gone away into fixation and tunnel vision.
Bring it back.
And the brain comes back into now. I used to be a big, the technical term for what's going on in the brain is the default mode network. These structures in the brain that tend to be on overdrive and highly active when we're just sitting and ruminating, overthinking something or daydreaming, often in a negative way. Part of what they've measured is that with meditation, consistently, the default mode network gets quieter in terms of, activity in the brain. I used to sit, like, even as a grad student, I remember sitting in my office during office hours as a TA, and I would just ruminate. I would be staring at the wall, running tapes of all the things I had messed up or all the catastrophes that might come. And I would spend hours doing that. And I can vividly remember doing that. Since I've been a meditator, it starts to happen, and like a rubber band snaps back. And I do think that that's what happens for a lot of people. But yeah, you notice the good, and you're more able to lean in toward the bad, the ugly. And this is stuff that I'm, that's come from my career, working with really challenging situations clinically, that, there's what I call a prize that's lodged in that present moment. It's not necessarily something that's going to feel positive, but it's there in the moment, and it's the truth of your experience, and it might be what's true in the experience of the other person. And that's the real prize when we can connect up with that, particularly when we're interacting with each other. Mindfulness gives us access to all of that we would otherwise miss, and makes a lot more things possible creatively.
Well, your relationships will improve because you're literally sitting with the person and focusing on what they're saying and in this moment, instead of all the things you have to do or all the things you should say. And that's your mind. It's like me driving. Like, I love long drives because I can get lost in my head.
Yeah.
And then an hour can go by and I was like, I don't even know what I just passed. I don't know how I got here.
Yeah.
I don't know what exits that it's like, that's why I like long drives for that reason. But at the same time, it makes you realize how quickly you can miss a whole hour of your day if you're not paying attention.
Yeah. People call that what, highway hypnosis or whatnot. I would argue, and I don't know if any studies have looked at this, it'd be kind of hard to hook somebody up to an fMRI while they're driving, but I would bet that a good chunk of that time for you, for me, when I've done that default mode network of structures in the brain is on, hyperdrive, churning. I used to drive to work before I went into Zoom land with everything. I would start fixating on all the stuff that was to come, dealing with kids with emotional behavioral, challenges. And by the time I got there, I was all worked up and the day hadn't even started. versus for a period of time I was doing mindful driving. Get in the car instead of flipping on my what's now the classic music, 80s stuff that I grew up with, right? And blaring it loud. There's nothing wrong with that, but I would do that and that would hype up my system. Then I default mode negativity. And I get in the car, I keep the radio off and feel my hands on the wheel, feel my seat in the chair, really notice that, scan my body really quickly, and then look around and then leave. And, I live in Boston, so traffic is not fun, when particularly rush hour. And I noticed multiple times that somebody's trying to edge in front of me. And in the past, I'd be that guy like flipping a finger at somebody. And instead, after practicing that for a while, and I didn't plan to do like compassionate allowing of others' behavior. It just kind of organically flows out of a mindfulness practice. You can practice it intentionally, but somebody would cut me off and be like, "Go in peace, my friend." And I still got to work at about the same time, but loose and kind of aware. And I noticed more stuff on the way there. Sometimes things that I've been passing for years that I hadn't even noticed were there.
I've noticed with my patients, the more they practice mindfulness and get calmer, the less noise they need in their external world. Like I knew this one guy, he would blast his TV as soon as he got home. And as soon as he got in his car, he had to blast his music. And he's like, I'm finding myself not wanting to turn my radio on in the car. I'm finding myself not wanting to turn the TV on and really enjoying that quiet. And I find myself with the same way that I like listening to podcasts and interviews and training courses instead of music now in the car. That's a lot calming and soothing for me instead of blasting the music. So I guess the calmer we get, the less noise we need.
Yeah. And as I'm sure you've experienced, you notice these gaps where you're not really thinking. You're aware, you're noticing things, you're responding, but you're not really like chatter in your head. And
well, as a woman, I'm probably doing that all the time. So men and women have different brains, so ours is going constantly.
Yeah, even a 3-second reprieve is notable. And this sounds like whenever I start to talk about them, I worry that people are like, oh my God, here we go with like existential stuff. I think it's important because most of us, identify with our thinking, like our thoughts are who we are. And yet if you ever have a moment where you're aware that you're not thinking, then who is that? Who is it that is just noticing stuff instead of the I story, I, me, mine that's constantly churning? I think that's important because if we can learn to not identify with the thoughts, then they can become what they really are. They're tools, that we can pick up and use. Thought can be really useful. It can help us create stuff.
And you work with children. How are children, with all the distractions they have in their environment now, how are they responding to mindfulness?
I have some colleagues that do the very direct, like regular teaching of kids in like large groups and whatnot around trying to bring mindfulness to them. I've done a bit of that. I end up in the talks that I give and, the work that I do. I mean, I do bring mindfulness practice into my sessions with, I mostly work with teens and then adults these days. What I've been discovering and hearing from my colleagues is that kids are hearing a lot about mindfulness and they're hearing a fair amount of misinformation about it since it's so kind of in and kind of hot and has been for a number of years now. So at school and, their teachers, and it's great. They're trying to bring it into the classroom or, parents are buying books and, they're sliding books in front of their kids. Hey, we need to read this book. So I do occasionally and grow in a growing way here, kind of this kind of response from a lot of kids and teens, like, oh God, more of the mindfulness stuff. So there's a bit of a backlash that's happening because at least in part, it's being kind of pushed toward them as a thing to do, as a should. And particularly if it's done in a way with kids where, okay, you're going to sit and pay attention to the, sensations of your breath for the next 10 minutes. So we have this kind of nice, chiming music in the background. They're going to be like, this is boring. I don't want to do this. What I try to do and what I recommend to people if they're interested in bringing mindfulness to kids is to start with yourself and be really practicing consistently and deeply. Have formal ways that you're practicing meditation. It could be 10 minutes a day. You can use apps. There are many different apps. You can, go on YouTube and find stuff. And there's lots of, you got to, kind of consider the source, but, practicing formally yourself. And then ultimately informally, where you're bringing, like I was talking about, mindful driving or mindful conversation is something I'm focused on these days. If you can bring it into those everyday moments, that's how you really start to teach kids, particularly your own kids. If you're dropping into getting fully present with that kind of kindness toward your own experience, they may not know the word mindfulness is happening in that moment, but they're impacted by that. And you're teaching them by how you're relating to your own experience. And then if they're getting curious at all, or they're suffering about something, helping them get present with that by you being present with them. That's what I call prizing a kid, which is this book I just put out called Prizeworthy. Really being able to prize that truth and experience of the child. And that's how you teach them, by how you show up to that moment.
So practice what you preach, basically, or preach what you practice.
Practice without preaching, and you won't need to preach.
Do what you're saying you're going to do. Like if you're being mindful, they see that, and then that's how you can, like, they listen to us more, they watch us more than they listen to us. So if they see us being calm and they see us benefiting from the mindfulness, then they will also hopefully want to do the same. It's like the first time I did a muscle relaxation meditation, I had no idea my shoulders were so tight. And I just, knowing the difference between what a relaxed body feels like versus a tight body was just mind-blowing to me. I was like, what is this? And so I wanted to do more muscle relaxation exercises and the progressive muscle relaxation. And so for a lot of kids, it might sound boring until they do it. And they're like, wow, that for that 5 minutes, I felt really good being calm and not having to think about anything.
Yeah.
Because they're overstimulated too, right?
Yes. Yeah, I think, I'll say this before I forget. One of the most important things with kids, particularly our own kids, is to do what is so hard to find examples of in the adult world, particularly on the world stage, is owning error. And when, I think mindfulness practice help, because if you really try meditation, you're going to mess up left and right, in the sense of you're going to lose your focus. You're going to get distracted. It's like endless, quote unquote mistakes. And the air quotes are because it's not really a mistake. It's you training your brain from what it normally does, which is that default mode network. As you start to get with your own mistakes of mind, and kind of organically from that, you can turn toward a kiddo and let go of your ego and your sense of indignance and rightness, and be like, hey, you know what? I raised my voice earlier, and that really wasn't cool of me. That might have really impacted you in a not so great way. I'm sorry. And that authentic ownership piece is a great way to get them curious of what is mom, what's dad smoking? What's different here? Something's different. They don't ever do that. Related to that, showing a kid that you are in pain. we worry too much that they're going to be unhorsed by us being a bit thrown by life. And though I don't think every raw piece of stuff is good to lay out to our kids, it can really make them feel like no one's really behind the wheel. And yet they know that we get stuck. And if we can, own it, but with a sense of like, I've got it, like, yeah, mom, dad is, I'm having a hard time over here. This is sad, or I'm really frustrated, and I got it. And these are the ways to really teach mindfulness to kids versus, the books and the apps and all that. Great. But it's really about, teaching via your own presence.
And presence is a present that we give to ourselves and others, isn't it? So and then paying attention, whatever we pay attention, there's a cost to that. So if we're so distracted and we're all over the place, there's a cost to how well we do the job. Just not paying attention to, like, changing your direction, changing the focus, and focusing on being in this moment is important. Are there any mindfulness exercises that you can share with us? One that comes to mind is the raisin exercise that I think a lot of kids enjoy. Have you ever tried the raisin exercise? And if so,
Yeah. Some kids have never eaten a raisin, so so
wow.
that's a new one for them. Oh, I actually like this raisin. Where you have them eat it, but after they've, in a visual and smell, and engage all the senses, keep them in check so that they, for like at least 3 minutes, they're not putting it in their mouth. If you may not get any willingness around a raisin, and there's no peanut allergy kind of stuff, give them an M&M
or whatever. Yeah, any
or
kind of
whatever.
fruit. Yeah.
And that's a great way to, anything that is involving the senses in a very vivid way is a great way to engage kids around giving them little samples of what happens when they get present. If you can link it to things that they're already curious about, because they have much more of a curiosity muscle, which is like a close cousin of mindfulness, than most adults do. Anything that you can gamify that drops them into the moment, and oh, by the way, that's mindfulness. How's your mind? But then you have them check in, like, how that feels. And then maybe, like with my son, I was doing mindful football throwing, because he's a football player. He's 7, so flag football. But I linked it to, things go better, right, when you are fully here and you're kind of opening up your body and you're focusing in on something, and you're getting out of your, I call it sergeant mind, the inner drill instructor says, no, you're going to suck. This is going to be bad. You're going to drop it. They're going to hate you. And instead, just let those come through and then throw the pass. And if you can link it to things that they're highly engaged by, that mindfulness might actually help them engage that more fully. Now they're getting a little bit more curious.
And it's activating that curiosity, whether we're 7 or we're 70, right? We need to activate that. And when we're sitting, you're mentioning sunrises. I live in Arizona, and the sun has been coming up at like 7 o'clock lately. And that's when I drop off my daughter. And we've had the most amazing sunrises that are like breathtaking. So every single, like, I'm the one taking the pictures, but at the same time, I just want to stop and pause and really take it in and just be like, wow, this is so beautiful. And I'm the person that will stop and smell the roses because I tell myself I should. I need just to slow myself down. And so I might seem silly because I'm like, I'm never going to let a rose bush go by without me stopping to smell it, just as an act of practice, I guess.
Yes. Yeah. I almost got my agent and my one editor hooked on a book title once to work on. I was going to call it Nexting. That we have a nexting mind in our society, and what's coming, both around pain and good stuff. And our phones don't help with that. They're walking, they're 3x5 billboards that we have in our pockets or purses. If we practice, which is another way to informally practice, like take your phone out and do mindfulness of your smartphone. Like instead of just launching in with your thumb, actually hold it kind of like you do with the raisin around mindful eating. What is this object? Like you're looking at it from you're an alien from Alpha Centauri or whatnot. What is this thing? Engage your senses, and then notice what happens when you hover your thumb over that favorite app, the one that you go to 90% of the time right after you open your phone, but you hover your thumb and then you start to notice your breath and then notice what shows up in the mind. Notice that nexting feeling, that impulse, and just get curious about it. That's a bit of an eye opener, how addicted we all are to that.
And how mindless we are when it comes to our phone. Like you said, we turn it on and automatically go, and it's like, how did I get in this app? I wasn't even thinking about it. And it's just a habit. You just go right into it. And I love that with the phone because it's always with us. Why
Yes.
not make it a mindful experience?
That's right. That's right. We don't have any new hardware in our brains, right? We have the same kind of brain anatomy that they had 100,000 years ago, and yet we live in a much more complicated world with many more hooks to pull us in and grab at our mind and body. So, I don't think it's increasingly, it's not a luxury to try to train our brains to be more present. It's like a public health issue. And
Yeah.
I think until we learn how to unhook and get present, and how we can really learn to get present in conversations that are hard, we're going to continue to polarize, get disconnected, and next into the next moment.
But it's a great way to avoid life too. It's like, okay, done with this one, next, and then just keep going until you can avoid it altogether.
That's right.
To be respectful of your time, I do want to keep that in mind. What advice would you have for your younger self about mindfulness? Because you have kids that are 7, and then you didn't really get introduced to this until you were older. What advice going back would you have for yourself about being more mindful and being more present?
I think to my younger self, going back to 7 and up through, my late 20s, let go. You're okay, dude. There was so much kind of compulsive have to in my experience. Have to get A's, have to be the best student. Otherwise, it will be proven and clear that I don't belong. I'm not good enough. I'll be rejected, and there's huge anxiety. I would go back, and instead of like any more shoulds, I would sit him down and, try to play peekaboo with those pain points behind his compulsive nexting and have tos. And it's okay to feel your fear. It's okay to feel anger, and ease up on yourself, my friend.
You would stop shitting all over yourself.
I would stop shitting on myself.
Exactly. Yeah, no, that's great advice, because a lot of us are in this go, 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 go. Just slow down. It's okay. The world is not going to end because of that one C or D or whatever. You're still okay.
That's right.
So where can people find you and connect with you?
Yeah, I mean, basically the hub of my e-universe is my website, which is Dr. With the DR, mitchabblett.com. And you can find out all the stuff I've been unleashing on the world, book and a course coming out and whatnot. So all my stuff is there.
Okay. Are you on social media at all?
Yes. Yeah. I haven't been posting in the past few days, but yeah, I'll, look for me on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook. And I'm new to Instagram. I have like 50 followers. So
it'll grow.
It'll grow. Yes.
We all have to start from somewhere, right?
That's right. That's right.
Well, I really appreciate you taking the time and joining me today and having this conversation.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is awesome.